We're going to start here on what we call our Today screen. Here on the dashboard, for those of you who are unfamiliar with ConstructionSuite, some of you may be evaluating at this point, some of you are probably proficient users that are just now starting to work with the QuickBooks integration. Some of you may be experienced users with the QuickBooks integration. There's a little bit for everybody today, but to start out with, I'm just going to cover the basics. Make sure that you guys understand here on this Today screen, we do have this financial graph down in the bottom right that does pull the information from QuickBooks and ConstructionSuite that we'll be talking about today and lets you guys see a very high-level overview of all of your costs for the projects. And so we're going to start just by highlighting each one of these. The projects, of course, at the bottom will be separated in groups, but the corporate center, for example, you'll see that we actually have 5 separate bars or 5 separate metrics for each individual project. And what these are going to be, or the red and green, are going to come from ConstructionSuite. The red's going to be your base estimate, or that original contract amount. The green is going to be your estimated value, which includes that base estimate plus or minus any change orders that you have. We'll actually see later on that ConstructionSuite does work very well with QuickBooks as far as those change orders go. We can send those over as a sub-job and a separate estimate. Once you generate those in ConstructionSuite, it goes seamlessly over to that QuickBooks Customer Center, generates that estimate for you, and allows you to continue to invoice and do other actions in QuickBooks off of that change order. The blue is going to be the actual costs. This typically comes from QuickBooks. You can actually manually insert actuals into the estimate, but since this webinar is more centered around QuickBooks integration, we're only going to focus on the QuickBooks portion and importing these actuals from QuickBooks. These actuals actually do pertain to your bills, your checks, your paychecks, and your credit card charges that you have in QuickBooks for each job. So it's going to cover a pretty wide range of transactions for you, and it's going to pull all of that. This, again, is the overview, kind of the high-level detail lump sum of it. But in the estimate, you'll see that we actually get the breakdown all the way down to the line item, if you would like, for what your actual cost is. It's going to give you the variance when you compare that to your estimated cost, and really give you a lot of good metrics to report on in ConstructionSuite. The yellow is going to be your committed costs. This correlates to your purchase orders in QuickBooks. So you actually can create those purchase orders directly from ConstructionSuite. And if you use our resource allocation in the estimate, it's actually going to make it very easy to customize exactly what's on those purchase orders and save you a lot of time instead of doing that by hand in QuickBooks. Finally, the orange is going to be your invoiced amounts. Of course, this correlates to the invoices you have in QuickBooks. And again, all of this can come through at the line item level in the estimate, but this is going to give you a high-level overview of everything on the Today screen when you first open the program, so you can see exactly what you're looking like and how you stand on each one of these projects. So, without any further ado, it is also necessary to mention that for those of you who haven't started the QuickBooks integration yet, it is necessary to have ConstructionSuite and QuickBooks on the same computer in order to integrate. Now, whether you guys have that cloud hosted on the same location, or if you have them both on a server or a local workstation, any of that works fine. You just have to have it on the same workstation somewhere in the office in order to integrate that. It can't be like QuickBooks is cloud hosted or online and ConstructionSuite is desktop. Most of that is not going to work in certain situations just because of the access and permissions between the two programs. Finally, kind of separate from the actual financial integration, for those of you who are using QuickBooks and just starting with ConstructionSuite, or vice versa, have been using ConstructionSuite and are just now getting kicked up with QuickBooks, we actually do have ways to facilitate that and really let you hit the ground running as far as the contact syncing goes. And so if you'd like to sync up your contacts instead of manually entering all your vendors or customers or anything like that, you can go up to our Data tab in the top of ConstructionSuite and then go to our Sync Center. And here in the Sync Center, you'll see that we have a specific section for QuickBooks, and that's going to be our contact sync. So if you do the contact sync, you've got a couple options here, mainly choosing which program has priority, which direction you're sending information. Really, it's going to give you a few options as far as if you're sending it from ConstructionSuite to QuickBooks, QuickBooks to ConstructionSuite, or doing a multi-directional, essentially merge of those contacts. And so they do have to line up kind of letter for letter, otherwise the programs don't know what exactly is going to be, this contact or that contact. But there are some great ways to do this and go ahead and let you guys hit the ground running, especially if you're starting with a clean slate in one program or the other. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into kind of the first estimate here for us to see. And there are actually, as I mentioned, some tools with the estimating that's going to make your QuickBooks integration a lot easier. So this actually is going to go into a few of the fundamentals of the estimating before the actual QuickBooks portion comes into play, which is going to facilitate the QuickBooks portion to make this much easier for you guys that are working on the financial end to manage and edit all of these transactions and such. And what that is really the main piece of advice that I always give everybody, is to use an estimate template when you are estimating in ConstructionSuite. This really goes whether or not you're using QuickBooks. It just facilitates things and makes it a lot easier and more consistent. But if you are using QuickBooks especially, then it is extremely important that you have an estimate template that you use. And it doesn't have to be just one. We have a lot of clients out there that do multiple different types of maybe spec homes or something like that. And if you have a couple general templates of buildings that you do, or styles or types, you can have templates for the different divisions of work that you guys do. But it is nice to have a set template for that type of work. And the reason for that is really because when ConstructionSuite and QuickBooks interact, and you'll see this in action momentarily, we have the ability or the option to send over items and categories from the estimate into your item list and chart of accounts from QuickBooks. And if you have those settings checked to where you are choosing to send, especially very, very minute levels of detail over down to the line item, if you make a change to one of the items between estimates, like you add an S to an item or you abbreviate something one time, and you don't change your settings as far as how you're sending it over to QuickBooks, which you normally don't want to, this is something that you do one time, it's set, then that is actually going to create a new item in QuickBooks based on the abbreviation or the additional S added or anything like that. And so really just to add the cleanness to the whole process and making sure you're not overpopulating your item list or getting confused, the template really helps there. And so we do have some estimate templates that we already provide to you within ConstructionSuite for multiple different disciplines and types of work, commercial, light commercial, etc. Today I'm actually going to be operating off of our residential sample template, mainly because it's already got some data in it. You guys don't have to watch me do any sort of data entry or actually do an estimate for you guys before we actually get into the QuickBooks portion of it. So that being said, let me go ahead and create a new project for us. Just to showcase some of the abilities of ConstructionSuite to knock out really two birds with one stone in a lot of ways and streamline this process. We'll go to our Projects tab and go ahead and create a new project for us today to start from scratch. And let's say that we're going to name this the Taylor Remodel. And so if we do that, we can put the project name in, and again, that project type that we designate here is mandatory. It's going to allow you guys to use a lot of the enhanced features like the workflows and dimensions, as well as the organization within ConstructionSuite. All things that are covered in some of our other webinars. We won't focus on those features too much today, but you should know that these types are very important as far as managing the organization and the workflow of your projects. So typically, that's all we would have to put in to create a project, but for the QuickBooks purposes, we're also going to want to put in a client because the client is necessary in order to integrate with QuickBooks, and you'll see why when we actually do the integration. And so in this case, let's say that I want to go ahead and create a new contact here as well. I'll go ahead and create myself as a contact. The rest of this information is optional. Really all it needs is a display name. You can always go in at any point and edit any of this additional information, but for simplicity I'm going to go ahead and leave it with just my name. And so I'll assign myself. I can do any of this other detail as well, but since it's not really our primary focus today, I'm just going to skip through the rest of this, leave the project description blank, and go ahead and finish this out. If you guys are interested in kind of how the project description and scope of work and the groups and things like that affect the way that you use ConstructionSuite, I would highly recommend taking a look at our other webinars, specifically the ConstructionSuite overview, which we performed on Monday, and the estimating webinar, which we performed yesterday afternoon. And what that will do is it will actually, we have those recorded online if you didn't get a chance to join in yesterday or Monday. And that will cover a little more of the organization, the reporting that you can do off the scope of work and things like that, and also give you the ability to really see how those go and cascade throughout the system. So this just created our project for us. It's actually going to give us our summary screen now where we can see any of the files or contacts, to-dos, estimate information from here. We're not going to concern ourselves too much with the project management side of things. We're going to go ahead and create our estimate for this project so we can get into the accounting. And with the estimate wizard, as I mentioned, I'm going to use one of our predefined estimates, this residential sample template, since it already has some data. It's already assigned to my project, and I can put taxes in here for materials, services, local, state, any level that I would like to. And let's just go ahead and put those in and finish this out. So those will actually affect the estimate itself. You can apply materials or services taxes in the estimate. Those also carry over to QuickBooks, of course. So there are some advanced features that you might want to take a look at with the sales tax and how it's treated between the two programs. But we do always give you the option when you're sending information to QuickBooks, whether to include that sales tax from ConstructionSuite, or if you have taxable items in QuickBooks, if you just want QuickBooks to actually apply that tax back to the items once they're in the estimate. So now that we have our estimate up, as you can see, I mentioned that we have pretty much a finished estimate here. Everything is going to be estimated out based on this template. And if you guys want to use one of our existing templates, that's a great idea. Obviously, it's not always going to fit exactly your method or your style of work, so if you want to customize it, go for it. Very easy, just by clicking the add category and subcategory links here and changing the names simply by clicking on the items. And then you can save that as a new template going up to the top. So save as template, save it right to the system, and use that as your integration template if you would like to, if you're planning on doing the QuickBooks integration. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do the one-time setup that you guys will run through. This is really where the majority of questions are generated with the QuickBooks integration as far as the startup goes. And really what I tell people is that there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's actually all the information is coming internally from you. You decide how you want to set this up with the accounts, with the items, with the detail. We're definitely here to guide you guys through that and make sure that everything is clear as far as what it's going to do. But one thing that I haven't stressed yet that I always do stress is before you do any of this, just go ahead and make a backup of ConstructionSuite, of QuickBooks, whatever it's going to be. Same thing with the contact sync if you want to make a backup before that. But what I tell people that really think that the QuickBooks integration is a big scary monster is that if you make a backup before you do anything, the worst that can happen is you just have to go back and restore that backup. And really that's the best way to see if your settings are going to do exactly what you want it to do, is to just make a backup, choose the settings you think are going to run, and send it on over and see what happens. We'll see a little bit of that today so you guys can see what some of the options do. Really every combination of options would take way too long to go through and show you guys, but it should be pretty self-explanatory. Again, if you guys have some questions while I'm going through, shoot them in. I'll be happy to address those. But what we're going to do here is go up to our QuickBooks Integration tab. You have the ability to send this estimate over, but if you haven't gone through the initial setup before, you'll have to go through this first. And, looks like I didn't save our client here. So as I mentioned, we do have to have a client for the project in order to do the QuickBooks integration. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and choose, I don't have any recent contacts. Let me go ahead and go to my contacts in just a moment. And I will go ahead and assign myself back to this project. And we'll go ahead and get underway. And if you guys will bear with me just one moment, I'm working on the other screen for a second, so I'm just going to assign myself to this contact again, and we will be off and rolling. Okay everyone, thanks for hanging in there for me. I actually realized that I was logged into the wrong database here, so my apologies. We're going to go ahead and recreate this project in the database that we're currently in. And we're just going to go tailor remodel one more time. Go ahead and select this project type. And again, you can get to see this now, exactly how easy this is to go through and create a project and work with the rest of ConstructionSuite. We're going to go ahead and just add myself one more time. Well, already exists, so we're going to add me. Go to my T's. And this time we don't have to take the time to actually talk about all the benefits of using the templates and everything like that. So we'll just open this template right up. And save it to our new project. And now we can step through the QuickBooks initial setup. So as I mentioned, this is a one-time setup for you guys. It is intended to be long-term and not to be altered as you go through it. You can alter it. The main reasons would be if you guys change item types from service items or maybe cost of goods sold type accounting to inventory. Somewhere down the road, it is possible to change it, but as with any transition like that, major transition with your financials, it would require quite a bit of manual work and deletion in QuickBooks. It's a very deliberate program. It's really hard to undo some of the things that you've done before without starting with a new company file. But so, with the QuickBooks initial setup, the first thing you're going to be prompted to do is to choose one of the account types that you're really trying to use, like the cost of goods sold or work in progress, or a custom type. And really all this is going to do is give you guys some suggestions throughout the wizard. This isn't actually going to set anything in stone yet. So when you do this, it's just going to be more of a, if you have an idea, select one of these. If not, select custom. And everything you do will be completely independent and not really prompted by ConstructionSuite. I'm going to select cost of goods sold just because that's what a majority of my clients work with. And we'll go ahead and move on here. And what you guys will see is that with this setup, you have the ability to, again, choose the detail that you're going to use or to choose the account type. And so just to step by this little by little, what you'll see is that first, we have the option to use or to not use a parent account. And with that parent account, for those of you unfamiliar, it's just going to give you another organizational structure within QuickBooks. It's going to essentially put everything under a UDA costs account or any other account that you'd like to put a name in here. You can actually tie this to an existing account if you would like. So if you just type the name in that matches up with an existing QuickBooks account, all of your future accounts that you add from ConstructionSuite will then be essentially blanketed or umbrellaed under that parent account so that it's easy to find in your chart of accounts if you have a lot of items there. But once you've determined whether or not you want to use that, you can go ahead and choose the detail that you're going to create in QuickBooks. And what I mean by that is if we look back here in the background on our estimate, this is our project totals page, so our summary essentially. We've got all of our categories, planning, foundation, framing, etc. And we also have our subcategories underneath each of these, design services, permits, and so on. You have the option to go in 3 levels of detail. So you can either create a single account when you send this over to QuickBooks, which will be the name of whatever account you put in here. You can have ConstructionSuite create an account for each category in the UDA estimate, so planning, foundation, framing would all be new accounts in QuickBooks. And finally, you have the option to create an account for each category and subcategory. So what that means is that everything you see on this project totals page would become an account in QuickBooks, and it still actually keeps that hierarchy and that structure. So you would have sub-accounts of design services and permits and lot costs underneath planning, and have that actually transfer over. Now, if you already have that structure set up in QuickBooks or you already have those accounts, it'll just use the existing ones. Of course, it won't create duplicates since QuickBooks doesn't allow duplicate accounts or items. But another common question that we get, and that is actually a huge time saver for those of you who have been using QuickBooks and are now starting to use ConstructionSuite, is that if you guys actually have an item list that you're very comfortable with in QuickBooks and you like to use for estimating and it's structured very well, then you can actually export that to us and we can walk you through that process. But if we can get your item list, it's actually possible for us to create a ConstructionSuite estimating template for you off of that item list so that everything's going to match up exactly, and you don't even have to go through and create the estimate template yourself. So vice versa, you can either have ConstructionSuite populate QuickBooks or QuickBooks populate ConstructionSuite. The latter would require a little more involvement from us, but it's definitely still a very smooth process, and it can happen the day of. And so, moving on from here, I'm actually going to choose this highest level of detail, or the most detail possible for the account for each category and subcategory, just so you guys can see the potential. I'm going to go ahead and fair warn you guys, and I'll remind you again when we get over there, this does not have to be the setting you choose. And so when you see all of the new accounts and items and everything in my QuickBooks, don't panic. It doesn't have to happen that way, and you can keep exactly what you've got in QuickBooks without overloading it with a ton of new information. So the next step would be to choose the account type, which as you can see was pre-selected as cost of goods sold based on the account type that I chose on that first one. I can still change this, as you can see, to anything else, but this was just one of the suggestions. And finally on this page, I've got the class tracking option. I can send these labor, material, subcontractor designations from ConstructionSuite over to the classification in QuickBooks. Okay, I've got a great question coming in here. And so the question is, what if I already have accounts in QuickBooks that I want to continue using, but I don't want to estimate using those? And that's a great question. So in case you guys were having a little trouble following the explanation up to this point, what essentially it comes down to is however you have your estimate structured in ConstructionSuite, if you choose to send the detail over, that's how your chart of accounts is going to be structured. There's not any direct mapping between the two per se, but what you can do is when you send the ConstructionSuite estimate over, if you have accounts in QuickBooks that you'd like to use, but they're not very good to estimate off of, say they don't make good categories or subcategories from an estimating perspective, what you can do is just do a single account to be created that every item that you send over is initially mapped to. And then once they're in QuickBooks, you can actually remap the items that we create, which we'll see in just a moment, to the existing accounts that you have, material, labor, anything like that maybe. And it will actually stick there, and any time in the future that you go and communicate between the two, it will actually then map those items to those existing accounts. And that might be something that you guys want to see actually happen. If you do, let us know. We'll be happy to walk you through that and make sure that the process is crystal clear. But that is definitely a possibility if that's your situation. It's actually very common that we get that. So moving on to the items, this is actually telling me that only creating an account for each subcategory was chosen last time. And so with the QuickBooks, just for time's sake, I'm actually going to go back and choose that same option and go ahead and continue. And so now we're to the item detail. First of all, you have the option to use items. 0.0001% of the time will I recommend to not check that box. The use items feature is probably something that if I had the final say on it, we'd probably just take it out, because using items gives you 90% of the capability with QuickBooks and ConstructionSuite interaction. If you don't use the items, you're not going to get a whole lot. That's really the key functionality and the core of what we revolve around both in QuickBooks and ConstructionSuite as far as the information flow. So once you check that box, go ahead and continue and decide if you want to use a parent item or not. Same concept as the parent account. It's just going to house everything else under it if you choose to use it. And you can name that again whatever you want. Tie it to an existing account if you type that name in there. And then you're going to have the detail. So this one's shifted a little bit. We have taken away one of the smaller levels of detail and added one of the higher levels of detail here. So you'll see that we now have the options to create an item for each category, an item for each category and subcategory, and an item for each category, subcategory, and item. And so the terminology might get a little confusing here. Essentially what's going to happen is in ConstructionSuite, we do have the categories, subcategories, and then line items within each subcategory. Now, QuickBooks is going to refer to all of those as items. So we're going to have ConstructionSuite categories created as items in QuickBooks, ConstructionSuite subcategories created as items in QuickBooks, and ConstructionSuite line items created as items in QuickBooks. So that's another very confusing point that people try to run into and don't quite grasp at first. It's very, important to understand that terminology in order to follow along with everything else. Again, I'm going to choose this the most detail that I can here so you guys can see the possibilities. And I'm going to choose to use service items. You've got the opportunity to use inventory, non-inventory, or other. I prefer service. And as you guys can see, as I mentioned, this is all very personal internal decisions to be made. We can kind of guide you guys here, but you know, we're not CPAs over here. We're not telling you how to run your company. We're just telling you how to make ConstructionSuite run with how you've decided to run your company. So a lot of this is very fundamental decisions for your company accounting that you guys typically need to make. And we can make sure that, you know, what you guys are doing makes sense and that it's going to work with your estimates. Finally, the option to use items for invoicing. Again, pretty core portion of the functionality. If you check this box, what it's going to do is allow that item to reference both an expense and income account, which we'll see that revenue account that we designate over here is also going to be an option for us to customize. Default name is going to be in here, UDA Construction Payment. Just as always, you can change the name, tie it to an existing account if you guys already have a revenue account. All of that works just fine. So I'm going to leave that just as is. Come here to my review screen and make sure everything is good to go. And I agree with everything. So again, make a backup. Please make a backup before you do any of this. Not because we're worried about anything happening to your data or, you know, crashing anything or anything like that. Because it's so easy to go through and accidentally include too much detail by clicking the wrong button and then send this over to QuickBooks unknowingly. And next thing you know, you've got 1,000 extra items. And for those of you familiar with QuickBooks, there's not really a way to go through and mass delete. You know, even if you make them inactive, it can cause trouble down the road. You have to go through and do it one by one. And nobody wants that. So just make a backup, protect yourself. It takes 30 seconds. And then just go ahead and send it over and see what happens. Worst case scenario, you restore that backup, change the setting, and try again. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this. Now that we've done the setup, we can go ahead and send this over to QuickBooks. So I'll open my QuickBooks Customer Center just so you guys can kind of see a before and after. I do have a fair number of clients in here, but if I scroll down to the T's, oh, and I do have one for the QuickBooks webinar. So this is actually a great example. If you don't have a customer in here already that correlates with the client in ConstructionSuite, it will create it. In this case, what's actually going to happen is since I already have the customer, ConstructionSuite's going to use that customer and just create a second job underneath it for the Taylor residence that I just created. So going back over here to create this estimate, I'm going to recap one more time. We create 5 things in QuickBooks when we send this. The ones that I talked about most so far are the customer and job. So the client that you have in ConstructionSuite will become the customer in QuickBooks. If you don't already have one, it'll create it for you. The project name that you have in ConstructionSuite will become the job name in QuickBooks. Of course, we'll create the estimate. That's the 3rd thing. And then the 4th and 5th are those item lists and chart of accounts that we just went through the settings for. So when you create the estimate, you have the ability to either do the project totals only level of detail, so you'll just have categories and subcategories on the QuickBooks estimate, or entire workbook puts all of your line items on the QuickBooks estimate as well. Customer jobs already selected for us, and then the final options are to include markup and how we want to do that. So in this case, I don't actually have any overhead margin on this estimate, which you can see here, but if I did, I have the ability when I create this estimate to either prorate that overhead margin throughout each line item so that I'm not explicitly invoicing for the margin or the profit that I'm making on this project. Or if I want to, I can include them separately just so I can bill or invoice or however I want to strictly off of overhead margin. Depending on how transparent you guys are, that could be an option that you guys prefer to change. So I'm going to leave everything just as is now. Go ahead and create this. And you guys will see this is going to step through really quickly. Create the accounts, create the items that I need. Again, if they already exist, nothing's going to happen. It's going to fly right through it. It's just going to check to make sure they're there and use the existing accounts and items. So now, in QuickBooks, you'll see that we did create this estimate. I chose to use the parent item for UDA items, so I've got this prefix on everything. And it brings over all of my categories, subcategories, and items, the quantities and the rates and amounts, and as I mentioned, those classifications that come over from ConstructionSuite. So a lot of power here, a lot of information can transfer. It's a lot better than going through and doing this by hand, especially if you're including all of this detail. The estimate's going to be done for you in ConstructionSuite based off of those templates. So Once we've reviewed this and everything looks great, we can go ahead and save and close. And you guys will see, just as I mentioned, we've got the customer here, Taylor Pruitt, and then it created our new job because it didn't previously exist for the Taylor remodel. So, once you have this estimate in QuickBooks, let's go ahead and see our item list just so you guys can see what that looks like. So we've got all the default items for the construction items that QuickBooks populates for you. But then we also have a set of category, subcategory, and line items down here. And actually, this was something that was previously sent over. I actually had different settings this time. So if I scroll down, you'll actually see that I chose to use my parent item for UDA items. And this is how that will look if you go to it, if I can actually find it. Almost there. Here we are, UDA item list. So if you choose a parent item, this is how it's going to look. You're going to have the parent and then have the category, subcategory, and line items underneath that. It's better for organizational purposes if you already have an assortment of QuickBooks items and want to use ConstructionSuite items separately. Again, some of you guys might not have heard me earlier or might have joined in late. What I've sent over is the maximum level of detail that we will populate your item list with. You can choose to just go down to appliances, bath hardware, cabinetry and countertops, and skip everything in between. It kind of limits you as far as the invoicing and actual, job costing goes, because you don't really know exactly where your costs are going or coming from, but it is an option for you. Personally, I prefer to do a lot of detail on the items, less detail on the accounts, maybe not minimal detail on the accounts, but less detail on the accounts. Keeps things cleaner, but the items are really what allow you to track those costs at a finite level. So, now that you've seen that, our chart of accounts will do kind of the same thing, except for this is just category and subcategory. Once again, you don't have to send over this much detail, but I've got the UDA parent item, and this actually isn't the same one, but it's the same concept. Parent item, category, subcategory, category, subcategory, and so on. So, going back to the estimate really quickly, once you have these items and these accounts in QuickBooks, and again, they might be the same ones you've had for a while, not much is going to change about the way that you operate within QuickBooks. You're going to use the items that came from ConstructionSuite, and you're going to create invoices and purchase orders and bills. ConstructionSuite does facilitate the creation of some invoices and purchase orders, so we'll show you guys that in just a moment. It's not completely useless once you send the estimate over. It actually does a lot of great things that help you in QuickBooks. But the fundamentals of QuickBooks, the main point I was trying to get across, is that you don't have to relearn QuickBooks to use ConstructionSuite. And to show you that, we're going to go ahead and open up this estimate. And I'm going to go ahead and create an invoice for this. And depending on how you invoice, meaning whether you guys have initial deposits and stage payments, or if you actually invoice for the work completed as you go through the job on periodic basis, is going to determine really what system, ConstructionSuite or QuickBooks, is better for you to invoice out of. And the reason I say that is because QuickBooks definitely has a lot of strengths. It's got some things that work a lot better than ConstructionSuite, but ConstructionSuite also has scenarios where it's going to work better for invoicing. And those scenarios really are if you do progress invoicing and you want to keep track of individual percentages for different items. So in other words, you don't have a flat percentage for the entire estimate. Using QuickBooks progress invoicing is absolutely the way to go. So you would come in here, create an invoice for selected items or different percentages of each item, and probably do what most of you guys already do. Come through here and just put the current percentage in. And I'm going to say, for this example, we're going to go through our planning phase and say that planning is 100% complete. Oh, and that was foundation. Let me get rid of that one. And so now we've got an invoice for our planning for a little under $100,000. So we'll save that now. That's the way to go. And again, that wasn't a very good example because I actually did the same percentage for everything. But if you were doing different percentages, using the QuickBooks invoicing is the way to go. The times you might want to do ConstructionSuite invoicing is if you have an initial deposit or stage payments on the job where you're just doing a flat percentage of each job. QuickBooks can do that as well, but what ConstructionSuite gives you the ability to do is to invoice for work completed, like a flat percentage down here. If we say 30%, instead of doing the entire estimate, I could do 30% of portions of the estimate. And this is something that QuickBooks doesn't really allow you to do easily. If I wanted to go through and invoice for 30% of planning, foundation, and framing for one reason or the other, in QuickBooks I would have to go through exactly what I just did and do 30, 30, 30, 30, 30 for every single item in those three categories. ConstructionSuite allows you to do that for 30% of individual portions of the estimate instead of just the entire estimate. And the other time you're really going to want to use ConstructionSuite for invoicing is if you withhold retainage and you're trying to collect that retainage at the end. ConstructionSuite has an awesome feature that you can actually invoice for that retainage. It goes through, scans all the invoices on all of your jobs, or I'm sorry, on this job, all of the invoices on this job with retainage, finds the less retainage lines from each of those invoices, and just sums them up into a single invoice so that you guys have all of that without having to search through and add it all up manually. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. If you're using retainage, always come back to this to collect that retainage at the end of the job. It's going to be much easier than doing it in QuickBooks. Since we already created this other invoice though, I am going to not create one from ConstructionSuite and just use this existing one for a little under $100,000. And once you have the invoice, what you can do with that is, first of all, import that information into your ConstructionSuite estimate. And when you do that, you'll actually see that it adds our invoiced amounts column, and we can see the amount that we have on QuickBooks invoices for each of these planning subcategories. Now, this actually does go down into the line items as I mentioned, so you'll see that building permit, zoning permit, all of the individual items have the invoiced amounts as well. And so you do have that control, and you can get that finite detail and the granular detail there, bringing it from QuickBooks. This is also going to be what allows ConstructionSuite to, if I save this estimate, to populate this information on that financial graph that we saw. So now if we go back to the beginning, and we were going to go back to this financial graph, you can actually filter this out to see the specific jobs a little clearer as well. But if we look down at our Taylor remodel, let me refresh this really quickly, then we would have the bars down here for the estimated amount, actuals, invoiced amounts, and so on. And so, again, what you're looking at here is a prime example of how you can actually use the financial graph. So you'll see that we have one project here that is extremely large. It's coming up on $45 million. It's really changing the scope of and the scale of everything else that we see and rendering almost all of that useless. The financial graph, you will be able to, apply filters to that, choose specific projects, and actually go through and choose what you're looking at to see things in a greater detail. Another thing that you'll see, we actually have some of these projects that are archived, listed in gray. If you want to archive a project simply by right-clicking on it and choosing to archive, that will actually remove it from the financial graph as well as a lot of the other calculations that are going to be seen here in ConstructionSuite. And so, back to the estimate really quickly. Once we have that invoice, we can do a lot more than just bring that into ConstructionSuite, but really a huge feature here with the invoicing is that we'll be able to do an application for payment. For those of you that actually use the AIA forms, G702 and G703, this is huge. This is going to save, we've had clients say that this saves 15 to 20 hours of work when they have to do these things. We can do this in about 60 seconds from ConstructionSuite. It'll probably take us a few minutes to go through it just because I'll be breaking it down and explaining it the whole way. But once you have that invoice, at least one invoice, and an estimate in QuickBooks, you can generate this in ConstructionSuite. And we're going to go ahead and step through really quickly. This is our first one, so no previous information. You can put all the pertinent info like the application number, the period to for the invoices that you're including, and the contract date. And then it'll actually pull all of these invoices that are in QuickBooks and allow you to go ahead and choose the invoices that are included on this application. So we've only got one on this one, so we'll just check that one. If you have any change orders, which we'll see in a moment again, will actually show up here that you can include on the application for payment. Any materials stored or retainage on those materials. Let's say that we don't have any permits and lot costs and things like that. It doesn't really make sense to have materials stored for that. Maybe if you've got some lumber sitting in the lumber yard that the bank or the appraiser, whoever it is coming out and evaluating, and you want to make sure they know that it's not actually on site, you can throw that there. But really, that's all it takes. And if you come through here and now preview this application for payment, what this is going to do is pull up that G702 form first of all. You can see pulls all the information from your estimate and your invoices to do your original contract sum, total completed and stored to date from those invoices, the total earned less retainage. If you would have withheld retainage on those invoices in QuickBooks, it would show that percentage, say 10%, and then the dollar value here, and it would reduce the balance due or the payment due by that amount. So we've got just that single invoice. Everything's pretty clear cut now that $97,080 is what we're invoicing for and what's due. So it's going to not only create that, but also our G703 form here, which is really the big part that is going to save a ton of time from both manual entry and risk of manual entry error and calculation error and things like that. So you guys will see that it actually populated my description of work with everything, populated my scheduled value, and for those items and planning that I actually have invoiced amounts for, you will again see that it actually brought that into my this period column, and everything that we've invoiced for is now present on our work completed on the G703. So of course, as we do progress invoices, this is going to shift to the previous application, and the next one's going to show in this period. But it does have the total completed, percent complete, and balance to finish for all of these individual sections, as well as the total at the end. So you can see total scheduled value of the job, total work completed to date, percent complete overall, and then remaining balance to finish. So this in itself is just a huge component, and this is actually something that's on our residential side in the corporate version of ConstructionSuite. On the commercial side, it's in the Catalyst version of ConstructionSuite. So if this is something that you guys are doing and spending a ton of time on, if you're already using ConstructionSuite, the upgrade to one of those versions would be more than paid for simply by the hours that you pay your bookkeeper. Any bookkeepers or accountants in here, don't hate me for trying to cut you out of the job here. Hopefully what it's going to do is free up your time to do more important stuff instead of tedious manual entry, and you'll still be making the same amount of money. But that being said, nobody wants people to spend 20 hours on manual entry when they can do it in 60 seconds. So this is going to be a huge, huge portion of your company and really free up a lot of time for whether it's your bookkeepers or maybe a project manager that still does this stuff or the owner of the company, for you guys to free up your time, up to 15 or 20 hours a week even, to do other things and make sure that everything is running smoothly instead of typing data in from a computer. And so now we're going to go ahead and close this once we've reviewed it and go ahead and submit this. And we'll save this to our tail remodel project. And now it's been recorded. So we can build off that, and we're going to do that in a moment. But first, let's go ahead and create a purchase order and a bill so you guys can see that. And we're also going to create a change order so you can see not only how that interacts between the programs, but also how that affects the application for payment as well. So let us go ahead and start with the purchase order. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my framing tab here. And in ConstructionSuite, we have some of these predefined views in the estimate that are geared a little more towards customizing these columns so you have better access to information based on what you're trying to do in the estimate at the time. I just switched to our organizational view, which gives us this resource column. And so using this resource column is going to be pivotal for taking full advantage of these purchase orders that you can create, not only from QuickBooks, but also in our vendor reports in ConstructionSuite. The request for quote and purchase orders and things like that can be really customized and expedited by using this resource column in the estimate. So I'm going to go ahead and assign as a resource here, these are materials, and I'm generating a PO, so I'm just going to put one of my suppliers in here. Let's choose Ajax as my supplier. So I'm going to assign these to all items in the category, or in the subcategory, and then I'm going to do it for wall framing materials as well. And of course, as you're actually estimating, you'll probably go through and assign people to, many more things than just 2 subcategories and have a wider variety. But for all intents and purposes here, it's going to work essentially the same way. You can go up here and create a purchase order now that I have a supplier assigned as a resource. And what this is going to do is allow me to actually filter that purchase order by the resource. Choose Ajax Supply. In this case, the only 2 subcategories in the estimate that they're assigned to are the ones that I just chose. If you've got them spread out through the estimate a little more, you can actually trim down the purchase order even more than just everything they're assigned to by either filtering by framework, so choosing the sections of the estimate like framing that you want to include the items for, and you can get into the subcategories here as well. And also, if you would like to, filter by classification. So if you've got resources that do a mix of work, maybe they do some labor for you but also provide some materials, and of course you just want to do the purchase order for the materials, you can filter by classification, choose material here, and then go ahead and select the vendor. So the vendor list is actually going to populate from the existing vendors that you have in QuickBooks. If you don't have this resource as a QuickBooks vendor, it actually allows you to add that vendor and takes all the info over for you and just allows you to create it right here. Since I already have them, I'm going to choose Ajax and go ahead and create this purchase order for them. And so you'll see this is actually about to take everything in floor system and wall framing materials and generate a purchase order for me, so I don't have to do that by hand. Something like this with a dozen, 20 or so items might not be that beneficial to do this way instead of by hand. The key benefits, or it might not seem so at least, the key benefits really are that, first of all, again, it's eliminating any manual entry error that you might have. Second of all, it's making sure that you don't miss anything that they're assigned to. So this is automatically going to pull what they're assigned to. You don't have to worry if you missed maybe those 8-foot studs if they're not included in the purchase order. And finally, this is actually automatically going to assign the customer and job to each of these items for you, which is really crucial in making sure that ConstructionSuite picks back up on that and brings it into the estimate. So if I go ahead and save this PO now, actually, let's say that we didn't estimate perfectly. Typically people don't. So if you want to go through and now edit this purchase order, let's say instead of 60 of these, we need 65, only 100 of these. Let's say that maybe the cost of this changed to $20 per. Maybe this one changed to $16.50 per. And now that we've made a couple adjustments here, let's go ahead and save this. And we can go ahead and save this PO. So, those of you who typically do purchase orders in QuickBooks probably know what the next step's going to be, and that's going ahead and entering this bill, maybe once we actually receive the invoice from the supplier, and enter this bill from Ajax Supply and generate this straight off the purchase order that we just generated. So we'll choose this purchase order from not 2014 but 2015 to go ahead and generate this off of. It's going to carry all that PO information right over to the bill, and now we can go ahead and save this. Notice, before I click off of this too quickly, when you're doing the bills, you can, of course, create the bills by hand and not off of a purchase order. I know some people don't do purchase orders, but they do enter the bills. If you're doing it by hand, it can still come over to ConstructionSuite. The thing to make sure that you're doing in order to make it come over to ConstructionSuite is, as I mentioned, the customer job has to be assigned, but also it has to be on the Items tab. ConstructionSuite doesn't read the Expenses tab, only the Items tab. And it does have to be the same items that came over from ConstructionSuite. So the names and the structure or the item path have to match up exactly. So if you're choosing these items from your items database, you're going to have to make sure that you choose the item that came from ConstructionSuite and not just one that might be similar. So once you've done that, you can save and close, and now we'll come back over to the estimate and import our committed cost first for this purchase orders. And you can do all purchase orders, just open or close purchase orders, depending on what type of information you want to see. And then you can also import your actuals, which, as I mentioned, include bills, checks, credit card charges, and paychecks. For this job, we just have one bill, so we don't even need to include checks, but I'll just go ahead and leave as is. And you'll see that that actually created our committed cost and QuickBooks actual columns. The committed cost, you can see we adjusted that PO, so it's a little different than the total price. The bill was generated straight off of that PO, so it's going to be the same as this column. But you'll notice that it's actually calculating the variance for us now. So it's going to compare that actual to, actually in this case, not the total price, but the total cost, which we don't have showing at the moment. I can show this very quickly. And so this is going to compare the actual cost to the total cost to you before, markup or sales tax. And you can adjust the way that these calculate. So you can apply sales tax before markup or markup before sales tax. however you want to do that. You can choose whether variance is calculated against total cost or total price, depending on how you define those. And you can also choose whether your variance overall is going to be calculated based on the line item variance or based on the bottom line variance. And so what I mean by that is if we go to our project totals and go down to the bottom, you'll see that our variance for the job is showing as almost $1,700 over budget. But if you look at the total cost that we estimated compared to what we've paid out, we still got a ton of room left in our budget. We've got $344,000 or so under budget. So why this is calculating this way is because it's doing line item variance, and this can all be found up in our tools in our options menu. This is doing line item variance, so it's only counting the actuals that we have currently entered against the total cost. It's not doing all of these items with zero actuals. You'll notice we don't have a $500 under budget variance here or a $4,600 under budget variance here because we're not actually working on this yet. We haven't put any information in. If you want to do bottom line, you can just uncheck this line item variance. The other option I mentioned was right here of calculating variance against total cost versus total price. And if I uncheck that, now I see that it's got my true overall job variance instead of just the work I've done so far. So a lot of power here, a lot of flexibility as far as what you guys need and want to see. It's just a matter of using those options to really customize it and tweak it to be exactly the metrics that you guys are looking for. And so, once I have imported the actuals or the committed cost or anything like that and save it, then it will again populate on our today screen with those bars that we saw previously. And so just to give you guys a bit of a breather and a recap here, and kind of a bit of a plan on how we plan on finishing this out today. We have already covered the initial setup with QuickBooks, making sure it's on the same computer, importing any contacts, and then talked about the importance of using estimate templates. Really, those are going to be huge. I can't stress that enough. Templates and backups are absolutely crucial to running a successful business, regardless of if it's ConstructionSuite or anything else. Always protect yourself by backing up your data. And templates in ConstructionSuite are really the pivotal portion of improving efficiency and streamlining your workflow. So after that, we went ahead and generated this estimate, sent it over to QuickBooks after going through our initial setup. Again, if you guys have any questions about that, let us know. If you want to create a template from your items list, please let us know. We can take care of that for you a lot faster than you guys can on your end. Talked about sending and receiving some purchase orders, bills, and invoices, generating that first app for pay. And that's about where we've gotten to at this point. For you guys that might be kind of wondering about where this is going in the horizon, we're going to wrap up here with talking about a second application for payment and showing you how the change orders that we're about to create are going to interact on that. And then after that second app for pay, I want to talk briefly about our work in progress report that is actually a brand new ConstructionSuite 6 feature. It's going to give you a lot of detailed financial information for managing these projects as you work through the project and not just at the end of it. So, unless anybody has any questions about some things we've covered so far, I'm going to go ahead and truck on. And so as I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and let's create a change order in order to see how that interacts and to use on our app for pay. I'll go down to, let's say, our plumbing systems and use our plumbing fixtures as an example. So we've got $4,000 estimated for plumbing fixtures. Let's say that the client made a change, added or upgraded some plumbing fixtures, and now it's going to be $5,500 instead of $4,000. So without going too much into detail on actually creating the change orders here, that is covered in our estimating webinars. And we also have some great Suite Talk videos on our YouTube channel. If you want to go to UDA Technologies on YouTube, and actually it looks like this isn't our primary, so let me save this as our primary estimate. Another important note to make here, change orders do only exist on the primary estimate. So if you have any secondary estimates, that's great, but the change orders do have to link into the primary. So if we go ahead and create this here, let's say we create it for the plumbing fixtures. And let's just go ahead and put CO on there just for clarification, since we already have a plumbing fixtures category. We'll set this as pending for the moment. Put this right into the existing subcategory. And instead of converting this subcategory, because I already have the $4,000 here, I'm going to create another subcategory for the amount of the change order. And so the difference between that, if you guys have something that wasn't in the original budget, or something that you would list as an option maybe for that dollar value that wasn't actually contributing to the contract, you can convert that. Typically, if you have something like this plumbing fixtures that already existed and you're trying to create a change order to add on or increase the budget for that, you're going to want to keep those separately. Otherwise, you'll just see $5,500 and this amount for the change order, and it'll look like you're charging an additional $5,500. You won't really know where the dividing line is between the original amount and the new amount for the change order. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this lump sum, and add that additional $1,500 that I mentioned to take us up to $5,500 total. And now, ConstructionSuite has a couple things that will help you manage change orders within the estimate. Some change order documents and reports. We're going to assume that we've maybe generated some of these documents, got it signed off on by the client, and now we have accepted this and are ready to send it to QuickBooks. So all we have to do is go ahead and change this status to accepted. When we do that, it's actually going to prompt me to go ahead and send this to QuickBooks, which I will gladly accept. And for those of you with a keen eye, you might actually notice here that there is a slight discrepancy. This looks very familiar to the original estimate that we sent over. Slight change here, and that is the fact that our customer job now has customer, job, and then sub-job that's automatically going to be created for us. So if we go ahead and continue with this, you'll also notice overhead margin is not applicable here. Overhead margin is part of the original contract job, so any change orders that you add on, we don't want to affect the overhead margin because that's going to change the original contract price. You can add line item markup to the change orders. So you can't see it right now because it's behind my windows, but we do have the line item markup column here. If I wanted to add that to the change order items, I could do that in the change order itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. It looks like it's created our estimate for us now. And it'll take us over to QuickBooks. And we can see that now it's a very simple line item. It was a lump sum change order, so all we've got is this one plumbing fixtures item for $1,500. And so to see where this estimate actually went to, we'll save and close. And now you see that we have a plumbing fixtures change order sub-job under our main Taylor remodel job. And any change orders that you add will stay at the same level. It's not going to keep stepping down and adding levels and layers to it. It's all going to stay at this main secondary level underneath the main job. And so you'll now see that we have the estimate for this change order for $1,500. If I want to go ahead and invoice off of this, let's say we do 100% of this estimate. And now I have that invoice for the change order. And let's say I add one more invoice to the main job. We've done some more work since that first one was done. Now let's go ahead and continue our progress invoicing here. And we'll go down to foundation after we're through with planning. And go ahead and say that we are maybe 75%, not 750. QuickBooks should catch that for you if you do it. 100%. Man, thanks QuickBooks. 100%, 100%, 50, 50, 25, 75, 100. Again, benefits of using QuickBooks, you have the ability and the flexibility to designate exactly what these amounts are. And just to get a little more on our invoice here, let's go ahead and go through that. All right, now let's say that we've done 25% of framing as well. And hopefully you accountants or bookkeepers can type a little better than I can in here. Otherwise, you are going to have a lot of entry mistakes for 250% of particular items. So let's change this. Get that right back to where we need to be. And so now we'll save and close. So now that we've got a change order, we've got another invoice and an invoice for the change order as well. Let's go ahead and let you guys see really the full power of the application for payment to round out all the additional features that you guys can add to it. So we're going to go ahead and accept this first application that we had, the $97,000. This is now application number 2, as you can see. The dates you can change here, but again, we're all doing this on the same day within an hour of each other, so it's all going to be the same. And now you can see that we do have that previous invoice listed here, so we can see that it was paid and included. But I can't check it, so it's got some safeguards in to make sure that you guys aren't going to double invoice for particular items. We can select, however, these two that are still outstanding and have about $22.05 to invoice for in this app for pay. You'll also see now that we have this change order. Selecting this change order is going to be huge because it's going to make sure that that scheduled value updates on the G703 and also that it updates the contract amount on the G702. So if I choose this, ConstructionSuite will notify you, by the way. This does say warning. It is a warning, but it's not indicating that anything is necessarily wrong. It'll tell you that multiple estimates have been found and ask if you want to continue. If you have a change order, this should be expected. You do have a second estimate in that subjob. Doesn't always mean that it's perfectly set up. The reason that this comes up is that if you send over an estimate from ConstructionSuite to QuickBooks and then decide that you want to make changes to it and send the estimate over again to QuickBooks to where you have the old one and the new one in QuickBooks, ConstructionSuite will actually pick up on both of those unless you delete the old one in QuickBooks, and it's going to increase the scheduled value by that amount for each of these items. So if it's, if you send the same estimate over twice, all the scheduled values will be double. So that's what this message is saying. Just be aware of the possibilities. It's not always a bad thing. It's just here to make sure that you guys are thinking through what you're actually doing and know kind of how your QuickBooks is set up at the moment and what you actually have present there. So we're going to continue. We'll leave the materials stored blank again, so we don't have anything there. And now we can view this second app for pay. And what you'll see, the key differences now, is that that change order was added here to give us a new contract sum to date. The total completed and stored includes all invoices, even the previously collected ones. It's going to subtract the previous amount to give us the current payment due, and we now have a new balance to finish after that's been paid. We also have the change orders listed down here in the additions and deductions. Credit memos also tie in and do the same thing here. So if you have credit memos in QuickBooks, it does the same. If you create a negative change order in the ConstructionSuite estimate, when it prompts you to send that over, it will recognize that and create that as a change order. And so if I were to go here, I'll actually have to accept this first. So let's take a look at the G703 before I close out. And you'll see that it has shifted. Let's go down to our planning. It's shifted all of our planning values to the previous application column. And then whatever we have this period, like these plumbing fixtures or any of these other items from foundation, are still in this period. So now we have the percentages overall. The scheduled value had been updated for plumbing fixtures, by the way. If we go here, you'll see that this is now 5,500 instead of 4,000. And at the bottom, of course, we still have our summary statistics. So you can go ahead and close out of this once you've reviewed it, accept it, save it to the job, and now that's stored in ConstructionSuite should you ever need to see it. You can always review change orders or applications for payment, by the way, by going up to the estimating tab and either viewing change orders here so you can see kind of the status of everything, what they were, what they cost, and the date, or in the QuickBooks integration, view the app for pays here, see the prior ones, and actually view these Excel files by clicking on the view option as well. So quick access to those, very easy to go back and review those if you ever need to and print them out. So that is a majority of the functionality that QuickBooks and ConstructionSuite will have within the estimate. Obviously, the specific procedures might differ from company to company depending on the way that you guys do transactions or that you prefer to carry out some of these change orders or itemize them or things like that. But the functionality that you just saw is really the key portion of ConstructionSuite. And this functionality, I'm sure you guys, if you've tried to see any other programs out there that say they have QuickBooks integration, you either haven't seen anything or they've told you that this exists, but you haven't really seen it when they showed you to this level. Because really, ConstructionSuite is going to integrate with QuickBooks at a much, much deeper and higher level than any of the other programs you'll find out there, and that's a guarantee. We're extremely proud of this. A lot of the features that we have here are, second to none, and the QuickBooks integration is a huge, huge point of pride for us here, and we hope you guys have a lot of success with it, and we're here every step of the way to make sure that you guys do get that up and running as smoothly as possible and that it's understood as well on your level. So it's a little more than, than just the technicalities of it. We do also have QuickBooks Pro advisors here on staff, including myself, that are here for a little bit of consulting. Again, we're not CPAs. We can't really tell you a whole lot of, or we shouldn't really tell you a whole lot of how you should run your business financially and where you should spend your money and things like that. But we can certainly tell you what some best practices are to manage your construction going on here with the finances. So finally, to finish out, the feature that I'm really excited about here is if we go back to our Today screen. Those of you who are on ConstructionSuite 6 may have seen this already. This may be a completely new revelation to you guys, but we do now have this Work in Progress tab at the top that's going to give you a lot more detailed information on your jobs other than just what you've paid out and what you've estimated. We do have that information here, so you can see if we actually go down to, let's find our Taylor remodel. So you can see that we do have our original contract price and the amount of those change orders that we added, which gives us that current price. But we also have some enhanced features that are going to go a little deeper than that and really give you the true financial position for your company on each of these jobs, and of course in total as well. And what I mean by that is we've got things like the, of course, estimated gross profit and percent of gross profit here. We have the cost or slip improvement that is really going to compare what you estimated on each job to what you actually paid out. So it's going to grade your estimating, essentially. So if you guys have estimators and you want to take a look at how they're performing, this is a great metric. You can see the difference between what the actual costs were and what you estimated they would be to see how accurate your estimating is. You also have a lot of things like total invoice to date and earned gross profit. Some of the things that can also be calculated from the metrics we've already seen. But another thing that's my personal favorite is the unearned revenue and unbilled revenue. So this is going to get a little more into your kind of accounts payable and accounts receivable on the job. The unearned revenue is going to be what you've currently collected for but haven't done the work for. Especially useful if you guys receive upfront deposits or stage payments that aren't necessarily valued based on the work that's actually been completed. Here you guys can see, kind of what the inflows have been that you haven't really earned. So it's almost in one respect a measure of how much work you guys still have to do for free. Which obviously you want to keep this number down as much as possible. There are certain circumstances where getting that deposit up front really helps you with the cash flow from other projects. But that's where this totals really comes into play, is you can see what the overall position is and what your cash flows will be expected to be. The unbilled revenue, of course, underbilling, so that's what you've actually done the work for but haven't received payment for yet. So you can expect to receive payment for that, within 30 days, within 60 days, depending on what your periods are there. Then you can really see for the accounts payable and accounts receivable what your expected cash flows might be. Finally, one thing I like to touch on, it does bring some of the schedule information, start date and completion date in here, but it also has this working capital and backlog, which is something that's a little more advanced. And what this is going to do, as far as analysis-wise, it's going to show you, and you'll notice if we mouse over all of these, we do get actually these explanations of what this is and how it's being calculated. But this is the remaining contract value minus the remaining costs. So what that's going to show you is if you've completed, say, 75% of the job, cost-wise, you estimated it would cost you $100,000. Retail price, maybe it was $125,000. And you've got $25,000 left to pay out. That doesn't necessarily mean you have $25,000 worth of income left. You might have $60,000 worth. You might have all of the real value of the job and what you're invoicing for at the end of the job when you've completed the work coming in. So this working capital and backlog is really going to give you an idea of what you expect to actually get out of the project for the remainder of that project. So the expected cash inflow essentially by the time that project is finished. So there's a couple other things on here that you guys can take a look at. Obviously going into each one of these in detail would take quite a while, so I encourage you to take a look at this if you have access to it. If you'd like to know a little more about it, please let us know. We'd be happy to talk you through some of these things. But we also have some screenshots and snapshots and graphs up here at the top that you guys can see of what we call snapshots that essentially track some metrics for your company over time. So things like the estimated gross profit percentage overall. You can see that this has slowly been moving up, and then it really peaked at this date. We expected to make a really big profit, and then something happened and we came back down. So you've got a lot of great information. You can take snapshots and keep track of these over time and really go back and evaluate how your company has either grown or trended or anything like that. So, looks like there are no outstanding questions at the moment. If you guys do have questions, again, my name is Taylor. I would be happy to talk to any of you individually. If you guys still have some outstanding questions, it might not be necessarily webinar appropriate, but might take a little bit longer to address individually. My number here is 800-700-8321. My extension is 380, so that was the main line that I gave you. The extension is 380. Let me go ahead and just throw this up for you guys so you can see it, in case you want to contact me directly. 8321, extension 380. And my email address here, in case you want to email me if that works better for you, it's just going to be tpruitt@uda1.com. And so feel free to reach out to me. I definitely appreciate everybody here joining today. It looks like we had a pretty great crowd, and you know, maybe you guys won't be so shy next time. Send some questions in. I had a few come in, but not really too many. That's, you know, it keeps things spicy. You know, you guys like to get involved, and that's the whole point of the live one, so you guys can ask questions. Really love to see that interaction from you guys. If you'd like to, please join us the remainder of the week. We've got 2 more webinars coming up. Thursday, tomorrow, at 3 o'clock Central will be our scheduling webinar. So you guys can look at our on-plan system and the scheduling there with the Gantt charts. And then Friday is actually going to be our ConstructionOnline webinar at 3 o'clock, which I will be co-hosting with my colleague here, Amanda. So you guys please join us for that if you'd like to. I'd love to make sure that you guys have all the questions answered, everything you need to know. I really appreciate your attendance here. It shows us that you guys are interested in being successful clients, and we want to make sure that you guys are as well. So feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to talking to each and every one of you, and I hope you guys have a great afternoon.